There are truths about the female mind that Carl Jung discovered decades ago, but which remain hidden from most people. Truths so profound and disturbing that they challenge everything we think we know about how women really function inside. Jung wasn't interested in pleasing anyone or being politically correct. He dove into the darkest layers of the female psyche and found universal patterns that no woman can escape, no matter how independent or modern she considers herself. These patterns have been engraved in the collective unconscious for millennia. What you're about to discover goes beyond superficial theories about female behavior. These are revelations that explain why certain reactions, fears, and impulses repeat themselves regardless of culture, era, or education. Jung unveiled the primordial feminine archetypes that silently govern every decision, every relationship, every moment of crisis. Prepare yourself for a disturbing journey through the labyrinth of the female psyche. Some truths were never meant to be ignored. The female shadow that nobody admits exists. Every woman carries within her a dark twin that she desperately tries to hide from the world. Carl Jung called this the shadow, and in women, it takes forms so disturbing that society has built entire structures to keep it buried. This isn't about being mean or having bad days. This is about the primal, destructive forces that live in the deepest corners of the female psyche. The female shadow contains everything a woman has been taught she must never be. It holds her rage, her jealousy, her capacity for manipulation, and her hunger for power. While men's shadows often explode outward in obvious aggression, women's shadows work differently. They seep out in ways that are harder to detect but often more devastating. This hidden darkness explains why some women can smile sweetly while systematically destroying someone's reputation. It's why a mother can love her child deeply while also resenting the life that child took from her. It's the force behind passive-aggressive behavior, emotional manipulation, and the ability to wound others in ways that leave no visible scars. Jung discovered that women who completely deny their shadow become the most dangerous. They project all their darkness onto other women, creating vicious cycles of judgment and competition. They become the perfect wives, perfect mothers, perfect employees, while their shadow finds twisted ways to express itself through others. The shadow contains a woman's forbidden sexuality, her desire to be wild and untamed. Society demands that women be pure, nurturing, and selfless, so all the opposite impulses get pushed into this dark space. The more a woman tries to be perfect, the stronger her shadow becomes until it starts to leak out in unexpected ways. This darkness also holds a woman's authentic power, her ability to say no, to protect herself, to fight when necessary. When women reject their shadow completely, they often become victims because they've cut themselves off from their natural defenses. They become easy targets for manipulation because they refuse to acknowledge that others might have dark intentions. The female shadow knows things the conscious mind refuses to accept. It can sense deception, manipulation, and danger long before the rational mind catches up. It holds ancient wisdom about survival, about reading people's true intentions, about protecting what matters most. But because it's been labeled as evil, women often ignore these crucial instincts. Jung observed that the shadow appears differently in different women, but it's always there. In some, it shows up as extreme people-pleasing that masks deep resentment. In others, it appears as perfectionism that hides self-hatred. Some women's shadows manifest as sexual repression that creates internal chaos, while others express it through emotional manipulation that controls everyone around them. The tragedy is that by denying this shadow, women lose access to their full range of human experience. They become half people, trying to live up to impossible standards, while their authentic selves rot in the darkness. The shadow doesn't disappear when ignored. It just finds more destructive ways to express itself. Women who acknowledge their shadow don't become evil. They become whole. They can access their full range of emotions and responses. They can protect themselves and their loved ones. They can be genuinely kind because they're not fighting internal battles. They can love deeply because they're not afraid of their own darkness. The female shadow also contains creative and transformative power. It holds the capacity for reinvention, for breaking free from limiting roles, for standing up against injustice. Many of history's most powerful women learned to work with their shadow rather than against it. They channeled its energy into positive change rather than letting it fester in darkness. Understanding the shadow means accepting that being human includes being imperfect, angry, selfish, and sometimes petty. It means recognizing that these darker impulses are part of the complete picture of femininity, not flaws to be eliminated. When women make peace with their shadow, they stop projecting it onto others and start taking responsibility for their complete selves. The shadow reveals itself in dreams, in moments of extreme stress, and in the things that trigger the strongest emotional reactions. Pay attention to what makes a woman furious, disgusted, or deeply uncomfortable about other women. Those reactions often point directly to her own rejected shadow material. The terrible mother archetype, hidden in every woman. Beneath every woman's nurturing exterior lives an ancient and terrifying force that Jung called the terrible mother. This isn't about being a bad parent or having maternal instincts. This is about a primordial archetype that exists in every female psyche, whether she has children or not. It's the dark side of the maternal instinct, and it has the power to create or destroy with equal intensity. The terrible mother emerges when the protective instinct becomes consumption. She loves so fiercely that she devours. She protects so intensely that she suffocates. She nurtures so completely that she never allows growth or independence. This archetype explains why some of the most loving mothers can also be the most damaging, often without even realizing it. This dark maternal force operates through emotional manipulation disguised as care. It creates dependency by solving problems that others need to solve themselves. It offers help that comes with invisible strings attached. It gives love that must be earned and maintained through constant performance. The terrible mother feeds on being needed, and she will create need where none exists to satisfy this hunger. Jung recognized that this archetype appears in women who have never given birth because it's not really about children. It's about the feminine impulse to control through caretaking. The childless woman might mother her romantic partner, her friends, her co-workers, or even strangers, using the same suffocating patterns that the biological terrible mother uses with her children. The terrible mother cannot tolerate independence in those she loves. She sees separation as rejection and growth as abandonment. She will sabotage success, create crises that require her intervention, and use guilt as a weapon to maintain control. Her love always comes with conditions, though she'll swear it's unconditional. The condition is simple. You must need her. This archetype reveals itself in the mother who can't let her adult children make their own mistakes. She rescues them from consequences, manages their emotions, and makes their decisions. She believes she's being loving, but she's actually preventing them from developing their own strength and wisdom. Her children often struggle with confidence and decision-making well into adulthood. The terrible mother also appears in romantic relationships where a woman takes on a maternal role with her partner. She manages his life, solves his problems, and then resents him for being dependent on her. She creates the very dynamic she complains about, but she can't see her role in it because she genuinely believes she's being helpful and loving. In friendships, this archetype shows up as the woman who always has to be the helper, the advice giver, the one who fixes everyone's problems. She collects wounded people and broken situations because they feed her need to be indispensable. When her friends start to heal and need her less, she often unconsciously creates new dramas to maintain her essential role. The workplace terrible mother is the boss or colleague who micromanages under the guise of mentoring. She can't delegate effectively because she doesn't trust others to do things correctly. She creates systems that require her approval and involvement in everything. She burns out from overwork while simultaneously making it impossible for others to step up and contribute meaningfully. This archetype becomes activated during times of stress or threat. A woman who normally respects boundaries might suddenly become controlling and invasive when she perceives danger to someone she loves. The terrible mother believes that love justifies any level of interference or manipulation. She cannot understand why her intense care is experienced as violation rather than devotion. The power of the terrible mother lies in her genuine desire to love and protect. Her intentions are usually good, which makes her impact even more devastating. Those controlled by her often feel guilty for resenting her care because they can see that she really does love them. This creates complex emotional dynamics that can take years to understand and heal. Jung emphasized that acknowledging this archetype doesn't mean becoming a cold or uncaring person. It means learning to love in ways that honor the autonomy and growth of others. It means offering support without creating dependency, providing guidance without making decisions for others, and expressing care without expecting control in return. The healthy integration of maternal energy requires recognizing when nurturing becomes smothering, when protection becomes imprisonment, and when love becomes possession. It means developing the wisdom to know when to step in and when to step back, when to help, and when to let others struggle and learn. Women who recognize the terrible mother within themselves can transform this powerful energy into something truly nurturing. They can love without consuming, protect without controlling, and care without creating dependency. They become sources of genuine strength rather than emotional quicksand for those around them. The animus, the inner man who controls her choices. Inside every woman lives a masculine force that Jung called the animus, and this inner man has been making her decisions since childhood without her even knowing it. This isn't about being masculine or feminine in behavior. This is about an unconscious psychological complex that acts like a separate personality, whispering in her ear and shaping every choice she makes. Most women go through their entire lives never realizing they're being controlled by this invisible masculine presence. The animus forms early in life, usually based on the first important men a woman encounters. Her father, brothers, male teachers, or early romantic interests all contribute to building this internal masculine figure. But here's where it gets dangerous. The animus doesn't just influence her thoughts about men. It becomes the voice that tells her what she should want, how she should act, and what has value in life. This inner masculine voice often sounds like absolute truth to a woman. When she hears it, she doesn't think, "This is just one perspective." She thinks, "This is reality." The animus speaks with such authority that questioning it feels impossible. It might tell her that success means climbing the corporate ladder, or that love requires total sacrifice, or that her worth depends on being chosen by the right man. Whatever it says becomes her unquestioned belief system. The devastating part is that the animus rarely reflects what would actually make a woman happy. Instead, it reflects the masculine values and perspectives she absorbed without consciously choosing them. A woman might spend decades pursuing goals that feel empty because they're not really her goals. They're the goals her animus decided were important based on the men who shaped its formation. In relationships, the animus creates chaos by projecting its qualities onto the men in her life. If her inner masculine is critical and demanding, she'll be drawn to critical and demanding partners. If it's weak and passive, she'll find herself attracted to men who can't make decisions or take responsibility. She unconsciously seeks men who match her internal masculine image, then wonders why her relationships follow the same painful patterns. The animus also shows up as the voice that argues in her head during conflicts. It's the part that becomes cold, logical, and cutting when she's hurt or angry. Women often describe feeling like they become someone else during fights, someone harder and more brutal than their usual selves. This is the animus taking over, trying to protect her using masculine strategies that often backfire in feminine psychology. This inner masculine figure has opinions about everything, especially about other women. It might whisper that successful women are cold and unfeminine, or that traditional women are weak and pathetic. It creates the internal conflicts that make women judge themselves and each other harshly. The voice sounds like wisdom, but it's often just repeating the biases and limitations of the men who shaped it. Career choices become complicated when the animus is in control. A woman might choose a profession because it sounds impressive to this inner voice, not because it connects with her natural talents or interests. She might work herself to exhaustion, trying to prove her worth in masculine terms, never stopping to consider what success would look like from her own feminine perspective. The animus affects how a woman sees herself physically and sexually. It might tell her that her value depends on being beautiful according to male standards, or that her sexuality should be expressed in ways that please men rather than herself. It can create a disconnection from her own body and desires, because she's constantly filtering everything through this masculine lens. Money and power dynamics get twisted when the animus is unconscious. Some women become obsessed with financial independence as a way to prove they don't need men, while others become helpless with money as a way to attract masculine protection. Both extremes miss the balanced approach that would actually serve her well-being. The most tragic aspect is how the animus can make a woman feel like she's never enough. It sets impossible standards and then criticizes her for failing to meet them. It compares her to other women and finds her lacking. It creates internal pressure that no external success can ever satisfy because the problem isn't what she achieves. It's the voice that can never be pleased. Jung discovered that the animus becomes especially active during major life transitions. When a woman is making important decisions about career, relationships, or life direction, this inner masculine voice often becomes louder and more insistent. It tries to take control during vulnerable moments, sometimes leading her away from choices that would actually bring fulfillment. The key to freedom lies in recognizing when the animus is speaking versus when her authentic self is communicating. The animus often sounds rigid, absolute, and judgmental. It speaks in should and must and always and never. Her authentic voice tends to be more flexible, curious, and connected to her actual feelings and experiences. Learning to dialogue with the animus instead of being controlled by it transforms everything. When a woman can recognize this inner masculine voice as just one perspective among many, she gains the power to choose which advice to follow and which to ignore. She can appreciate the animus for its strengths while refusing to let it dominate her decisions. The goal isn't to eliminate the animus, but to integrate it consciously. When properly balanced, it provides valuable qualities like logic, assertiveness, and the ability to take action. But these qualities serve her feminine nature rather than overriding it. She becomes whole instead of split, authentic instead of driven by unconscious programming. The mask of the female persona and its secrets. Every woman wears a carefully crafted mask that Jung called the persona, and most of the time, she doesn't even realize she has it on. This mask isn't just about being polite or professional. It's a complete false identity that she presents to the world. believing it will keep her safe, loved, and accepted. The terrifying truth is that many women become so identified with their mask that they lose all connection to who they really are underneath. The female persona develops as a survival strategy. From childhood, girls learn that certain qualities are rewarded while others are punished or ignored. They quickly figure out which version of themselves gets the most positive attention and begin to strengthen that personality while hiding everything else. The sweet girl, the smart girl, the helpful girl, the strong girl. These become rigid roles rather than natural expressions of personality. What makes the female persona especially dangerous is how socially rewarded it becomes. A woman can build an entire successful life around her mask. Career achievements, social recognition, romantic relationships, all based on this false presentation of herself. The external validation feels so good that she never questions whether this persona actually represents who she is or what she wants. The mask requires constant maintenance and performance. Every social interaction becomes a careful calculation of how to present herself to get the desired response. She monitors her words, expressions, body language, and even thoughts to make sure nothing slips through that might damage her carefully constructed image. This level of self-monitoring is exhausting, but it becomes so automatic that she doesn't notice the drain. Behind the persona lies everything the woman has decided is unacceptable about herself. Her anger, her selfishness, her sexuality, her opinions, her needs, her authentic reactions, all push down where they can't threaten her social acceptance. But these rejected parts don't disappear. They create internal pressure that shows up as anxiety, depression, physical symptoms, or sudden emotional outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. The female persona often centers around being likable and non-threatening. Women learn early that being too much of anything, too loud, too smart, too sexual, too ambitious, too emotional, creates problems. So the mask becomes carefully moderate, always appropriate, never too much. This creates women who seem pleasant and easy to be around but who have no real presence or impact. In romantic relationships, the persona creates disaster because it attracts partners who are drawn to the mask rather than the real woman. She then faces an impossible choice: maintain the exhausting performance forever, or risk losing love by revealing her authentic self. Many women choose the performance, creating relationships that feel empty and disconnected despite appearing perfect from the outside. The workplace persona often involves suppressing feminine qualities that might be seen as weak or unprofessional. Women learn to speak differently, move differently, and think differently in professional settings. They may succeed in their careers while feeling increasingly disconnected from their natural ways of being. The success feels hollow because it's based on becoming someone else. Mother's persona can be particularly imprisoning because society has such strong expectations about maternal behavior. Women often feel pressured to present as endlessly patient, selfless, and nurturing, hiding any frustration, exhaustion, or resentment they feel. This creates internal conflict because normal human reactions to stress and demands get labeled as failures of motherhood. The social media age has intensified persona pressure exponentially. Women now curate online identities that must be maintained constantly, sharing only the aspects of life that support their chosen image. The gap between online presentation and internal reality becomes a source of shame and disconnection from authentic experience. Jung observed that the persona becomes most rigid during times of insecurity or fear. When a woman feels threatened socially or professionally, she often doubles down on her mask, making it even more perfect and controlled. This is exactly when she most needs to connect with her authentic self, but the fear makes that feel too dangerous. The body often rebels against persona maintenance through illness, exhaustion, or other physical symptoms. The constant tension of holding a false position creates stress that manifests in concrete ways. Many women develop chronic health issues that mysteriously improve when they begin living more authentically. Relationships with other women become complicated when everyone is wearing masks. Real intimacy becomes impossible because no one is showing their true self. Women end up competing with each other's personas rather than connecting as human beings. This creates the shallow friendships and social tensions that many women experience but can't explain. The most heartbreaking aspect of the persona trap is how it prevents genuine self-knowledge. A woman can reach middle age without knowing what she actually likes, wants, or believes, because she spent so long focusing on what version of herself gets the best response from others. Her authentic preferences, opinions, and desires remain buried under layers of social conditioning. Breaking free from the persona requires incredible courage because it means risking the loss of everything built on the false foundation. Jobs might be lost, relationships might end, social status might disappear. But what emerges is the possibility of genuine satisfaction, real relationships, and authentic success that doesn't require constant performance. Recognition is the first step toward freedom. When a woman begins to notice the difference between how she acts and how she feels, between what she says and what she thinks, between who she is alone and who she is with others, she starts to see the mask. The goal isn't to destroy the persona completely, but to choose consciously when to wear it and when to take it off. The primitive fear of abandonment that defines everything. Deep in every woman's psyche lives a terror so ancient and overwhelming that it shapes every relationship, every decision, and every moment of vulnerability she will ever experience. This isn't just about being afraid of breakups or divorce. This is about a primal survival fear that goes back to the beginning of human existence, when abandonment meant death. And this fear still controls modern women in ways they never realize. This fear exists because, for countless generations, women's survival depended entirely on maintaining connections with others. A woman alone in the wilderness couldn't hunt large game, couldn't defend against predators, couldn't survive childbirth without help. Her very existence required the protection and support of family, tribe, or mate. This biological reality is still hardwired into the female nervous system, even though the external circumstances have completely changed. The abandonment fear doesn't announce itself with obvious anxiety about being left alone. Instead, it operates through subtle behaviors that seem unrelated to fear at all. It shows up as the inability to say no when saying yes feels wrong. It appears as the compulsion to agree with opinions that don't match her own thoughts. It manifests as the desperate need to be helpful, useful, or entertaining to maintain other people's interest and affection. Women often mistake this fear for love or caring, but it's actually a survival mechanism running unconsciously in the background. The woman who can't bear to see others upset isn't necessarily more empathetic than others. She might be unconsciously terrified that emotional discomfort in her relationship signals impending abandonment. So she works frantically to manage everyone else's feelings to keep them from pulling away. This fear creates the people-pleasing patterns that exhaust so many women. They say yes when they mean no, give when they're already empty, and smile when they're angry or hurt. They've learned that authentic responses sometimes create distance, and distance feels like a threat to survival. So they perform whatever version of themselves keeps others close and comfortable. In romantic relationships, the abandonment fear becomes especially devastating. It might drive a woman to stay in harmful situations because being alone feels more dangerous than being mistreated. It can make her tolerate behavior she knows is wrong because confronting it might lead to rejection. She might change fundamental parts of herself to avoid conflict, not realizing that she's slowly disappearing in the process. The fear also creates its own fulfillment through desperate, clingy behavior that actually pushes people away. When the terror gets too strong, women sometimes become demanding, suspicious, or controlling, trying to force the security they crave. These behaviors create the very abandonment they're designed to prevent, but the fear is too primitive to understand this irony. This ancient terror explains why many women struggle with boundaries. Setting limits feels dangerous because it might upset others and cause them to leave. So they allow their time, energy, resources, and even bodies to be used in ways that harm them rather than risk the catastrophic feeling of being alone. The boundary becomes a luxury they feel they can't afford. The abandonment fear distorts a woman's perception of her own worth. If survival depends on being chosen and kept by others, then her value becomes entirely external. She measures herself by how many people want her around, how often she's invited, how quickly her calls are returned. Her self-esteem rises and falls based on other people's behavior rather than her own accomplishments or character. Career decisions get twisted by this fear in ways that seem unrelated to abandonment. A woman might stay in jobs that drain her because leaving feels too risky. She might avoid pursuing opportunities that could upset colleagues or supervisors. She might sacrifice her professional growth to maintain harmony in her workplace relationships, never realizing that her fear of professional isolation is driving these choices. Even success can trigger abandonment fear. Some women sabotage their own achievements because they worry that being too successful will make them threatening or unlikable. They've absorbed the message that female success can lead to social rejection, so they unconsciously limit themselves to stay within the bounds of what feels relationally safe. The fear shows up differently depending on early experiences. Women who experienced actual abandonment or rejection in childhood often develop hypervigilant relationship patterns, constantly scanning for signs that someone is pulling away. Those who grew up with conditional love might become performance addicts, believing they must constantly earn their place in others' lives. Physical symptoms often accompany this fear without women connecting the dots. The tight chest when someone seems distant, the stomach knots when conflict arises, the insomnia when relationships feel unstable. The body is responding to perceived survival threats even when the rational mind knows that being alone won't actually kill her. The fear becomes most intense during life transitions when support systems naturally shift. Starting new jobs, moving to new places, ending relationships, having children, or facing major changes can activate the primitive terror because these situations involve uncertainty about who will be there to provide support and connection. Social media has amplified this fear in cruel ways. The constant measurement of likes, comments, and responses feeds directly into the abandonment terror. Women find themselves crafting posts designed to maintain connection rather than express authenticity, and they interpret silence or reduced engagement as signs of rejection. Jung recognized that this fear could never be conquered by external reassurance because it's not really about current relationships. It's about an ancient survival program that no amount of modern security can switch off. The solution lies not in finding perfect relationships that never trigger the fear, but in developing internal resources that can handle the terror when it arises. Learning to tolerate the physical and emotional sensations of abandonment, fear without immediately acting to make them stop is the beginning of freedom. When a woman can feel the primitive terror without desperately trying to fix or avoid it, she regains choice in how she responds to relationships and conflicts. The fear never completely disappears, but it loses its control when it's recognized and understood. A woman can acknowledge the ancient programming while choosing to act from her adult wisdom rather than her primitive survival instincts. She can maintain connections without sacrificing herself, and she can risk authenticity even when it might create temporary distance. The truths Carl Jung discovered about the female psyche aren't comfortable, but they are liberating. They reveal that behind every woman exists a complex psychological universe, governed by ancient forces operating in the shadows of consciousness. The shadow nobody admits, the animus that controls decisions, the persona that imprisons authenticity, the primitive fear of abandonment, and the silent competition between women. All these elements work together, creating behavioral patterns that repeat through generations, regardless of culture or education. Jung wasn't trying to diminish women by revealing these truths. He was offering a map to psychological freedom. Because only when a woman recognizes these unconscious forces can she consciously choose how to respond to them instead of being controlled by them. The question that remains is devastatingly simple. Do you have the courage to look at these truths in your own life? Or will you continue living as a puppet of forces you don't even know exist? The choice is yours. But remember, the unconscious doesn't ask permission to operate. It simply acts. The only question is whether you'll participate consciously in your own life or remain a spectator to patterns that repeat eternally. Some truths were never meant to be ignored.